Alright, now that we have stat allocation and difficulty in our game, let's give the player the choice of where to go within our text-based environment. Now, how do we do that? Well, we want to give them, of course, an input for them to tell us where they want to go. So we're going to make a variable for their input, and we're going to prompt them asking, where do you want to go? Now, how do we know where they want to go? How do we check what this value is compared to something we might expect, like north, south, east, or west? Well, we do that with a type of code structure that's known as a conditional. A conditional is a code structure in which a block of code will only execute if a certain condition is true. Now, what does that look like? Well, we start with the keyword if, we open a set of parentheses, and here is where we put our condition inside the parentheses. We'll get to what that looks like in a minute. And we open a block with braces, and finally in here we would put the code that will execute if true, if the condition is true. Now, what does a condition look like? A condition is an expression that evaluates to either true or false. These are known as Boolean values. Now, how do we get an expression that evaluates to true or false? Well, we can use comparison operators. A comparison operator compares two values to see what the relationship is. So, for example, we can look at our input and see if it's equal to and for north. Note here that there are two equal signs. This is equality, where this is assignment. Now, in here, we can tell the player that you have moved to the north. And if we save this and run it, and we give our character the name of Nuggets because that is the best name, we can type N, and we have moved to the north. And thus we have player choice in our game. Now, how about if we want to add an input for south? Well, we could add another if statement in a very similar fashion. Now, this will work. However, it's a little bit inelegant because, say we add our options for east and west next. That's 4 if statements right in a row doing more or less the exact same thing. We could compress this somewhat by turning this into an else if statement. Now, what is an else if statement? Well, this if block right here will only ever be checked if this is false. So how does this benefit us? Well, we could have more complex conditions in which this may be false, but we have a more specific condition that's true, or something like that, or a more general condition, vice versa. However, it also somewhat increases the efficiency of our program, because you can imagine that if we get an N for north, and we check that, and that is the very first thing that comes up, and then we execute this, we need not bother executing the rest of this other code. Now let's add another else if statement for west. You have moved to the west. Now, of course, we have to have one more block for east. We could make that an else if block. However, there is one more type of structure we can use in this conditional to accomplish the same thing. That is called an else block. Now, what does an else block do? You'll notice that there is no set of parentheses in which we can put a condition. That is because an else block will only execute if all of the preceding if and else if blocks are false. Right, so if this is false, and this is false, and this is false, then we can assume then that we're moving east. And thus tell the player, you have moved to the east. And so if we go over and reload the page, Nuggets redo our stats, and we move to east with our E, then that works. Now you might be wondering, can we nest these inside of each other to create more complex conditions? And the answer is yes. So, for example, say in your game, the player wants to move north, right? But there's a big scary dragon that's very intimidating, and you know you have to be strong enough in order to be able to be brave enough to approach it. Well, the way you would accomplish that is inside of this if block, we can make another if block. Now say if the player's attack is greater than or equal to 10, then they will move north. However, if it's not greater than or equal to 10, you are too scared of the dragon. And you can see how this works. It's exactly the same as the broader if-else chain here, except within this if condition. So this only ever executes if the input is n for north. Notice here that this greater than or equal to sign is more or less exactly as you would expect it. If attack is greater than 10, as in it's 11, 12, or so on, or if it's equal to 10, as in it's exactly 10, then they will move to the north, and otherwise they will be too scared of the dragon. Now, let's say that there is a toxic marsh to the south, where you have to be sturdy enough to make it through the poison without falling first. Well, we can check the player's defense. If the player's defense is less than 4, because this is a rather weak poison, then you have been poisoned, and they cannot proceed. However, if it's not less than 4, then they successfully move to the south. You see how this works? It's less than, in a very similar fashion up here where we say greater than or equal to, but it's just a less than, not less than or equal to, because we don't have the extra equal sign. Don't make the confusion that, or the mistake rather, that you have to have 2 characters for comparison operators. Not so. It depends on what kind of operator you're trying to use. Now, let's say that in the West, there is a Buddhist temple that you have to be of the utmost balanced mind in order to enter. Let's say that we are checking that their stats are balanced and their difficulty is the default. If the difficulty is the default of 1, then we can assume that their HP is 100 and they would be successful. However, if it is not 100, then they cannot enter. How do we check if it's not 100? Well, we can open the if statement and check if their HP is not 100. Then we can tell them you are too unbalanced to enter the temple. And conversely, they are able to enter if they are balanced. Note here what this is a not equal to comparison operator. Exclamation marks in JavaScript in general typically indicate not, which simply reverses the whatever condition is present. But for not equal to, it is part of the operator itself. So let's test this out. If we save our game and go ahead and reload over here, we become Nuggetsy Adventurer. Alright, now let's try moving to the west. We have a difficulty of 3 set. You are too unbalanced to enter the temple. This, broadly speaking, is what conditional statements look like.